So I'm going to start a little differently today. I'm not going to read the scripture first. So I'm going to set off a little bit more of a basis for our next few weeks, really, here. So the next few weeks, we're talking about questions. And so one of the, ironically, one of the big questions in my mind is just, why are questions important? And are they really important? I feel like that's kind of the look that a lot of people have given me in the last week. We're talking about questions. Okay. What about it? But so there's really a rich history behind asking questions. And it really makes sense from just the very human perspective. As humans, we ask a lot of questions. That's really one of the first ways that we learn how to discover the world. Children ask questions constantly. And it's all because everything's new to them and they want to know how everything works. This is really the basis of all education. It's one of the things that I've heard from practically all of my professors is just the value of questions. Because the more questions you ask, the more you can seek out that sort of knowledge. And so questions become incredibly important. And some of the best professors that I've had always say that the more that you learn, the more you realize you don't know, because you end up trying to answer these questions you have, but you just end up having more questions. This is kind of the basis for the best sort of education in my mind. So also there's a very biblical basis to all of this. Because Jesus also asked a huge amount of questions. When you read through the Bible, through the New Testament, you see Jesus just constantly asking questions. It seemed to be one of the key ways that he taught, actually, ironically, was through asking questions. So of course, for Jesus, it was different than the way that we often ask questions, because Jesus basically knew the answers he was going for. He was using it as a teaching method. Rather than seeking out his own knowledge, he was trying to point out knowledge, point out teachings, point out truths to other people. So for example, I started Googling around and I found this wonderful list of 135 questions that Jesus asked. This is not an exhaustive list, for the record. There are probably 200 questions that Jesus asked. It's kind of amazing when you think about it, just how short the New Testament is, at least in comparison to the Old Testament, and how many questions that just Jesus asked. Not to mention all the questions people asked of him, which just goes way through the window. So I'd like to read for you a few of these questions, because there seem to be a few categories that these questions kind of fall into, and the first one is pretty obvious, so we'll see if you pick up on it. I'm not going to read all that many, because there are a ton of them here, obviously, but I'll probably read about 10 of them for you here. So let's see if you can pick up on any themes. So the first one is, if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Or who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? Or I love this one. Why do you worry about clothes? That also goes along with one later that says, who touched my clothes? Which out of context sounds really funny. And also he says, why are you so afraid? And also, why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? And several times I feel like he said this. Do you believe that I am able to do this? And then, what did you go out into the desert to see? So there are a number of really interesting questions that Jesus asked. And so the first, and in my mind the most obvious reason that Jesus asked questions wasn't really to get an answer, it was just to prove a point. A lot of them were pretty straightforward. He's just saying, look at this thing, don't do it. Pretty obvious, why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? Well, just stop doing it, basically. That's all he was saying. But even then, I think it's much more useful to ask those things in the form of a question, because if you just tell somebody and point your finger at them and say, don't do this, they don't tend to listen quite as well. As opposed to if it has to be some sort of self-discovery or some other thing turns in your mind when you have to figure it out for yourself. Come on up. And she's going, what's going on up here? Who is this guy? You want to come up here? No. Okay. Fine. It's a very straightforward answer to my question. Anyways, So along with that, there are a few other reasons I think that Jesus asked questions, because they weren't all completely pointed. She's very curious up here. I'll just let her roam around now. That's fine. Anyways, so there were other reasons that Jesus asked questions, and certainly not all of the answers were outright obvious. Because I think a lot of them were asking for some sort of self-discovery or self-awareness. Jesus was really all about self-awareness. He was constantly pointing out things that people did that they shouldn't be doing, or something along those lines. Or as the slightly different self-discovery, he was really trying to teach them truths in really abstract ways, just to point them in the right direction, but there were still some other dots that needed to be connected. So Jesus was really leading people to truths by asking them questions, because once again, if you actually have to explore something for yourself rather than being outright told something, you really grasp it a lot better, I think. If you actually have to take the time to seek out an answer, it really sticks with you. And so I think in our faith, we really need to start really asking deep questions, because our faith can never truly be our own unless we have to seek out the answers for ourselves. We'll get more into that. So I'd like to read you... Man, she's mobile today. I'd like to read for you a story from the book of John. And so it starts with John the Baptist. John the Baptist, has been doing his thing. He went off into the wilderness for some bizarre reason, and he's been baptizing people, and he's been teaching people. And generally, John has spoken that his purpose in life is to prepare the way for the Messiah. So he's basically teaching people to prepare them for the coming of this guy that the Jewish people have been waiting for centuries and centuries. And so this story starts in John. Oh, she got my clicker. Okay. So it starts in John chapter 1, and it starts on verse 35, and I'll go through 51. Oh yeah, I've got it up there. There we go. So it says, "The next day John was standing again with two of his disciples. When he saw Jesus walking along, he said, 'Look, the Lamb of God.' The two disciples heard what he said, and they followed Jesus. When Jesus turned and saw them following, he asked, 'What are you looking for?' They said, 'Rabbi, where are you staying?' He replied, 'Come and see.' So they went and saw where he was staying, and they remained with him that day. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon. One of the two disciples who heard what John said and followed Jesus was Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, 'We have found the Messiah,' which is translated Christ. He led him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, 'You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas,' which is translated Peter. The next day Jesus wanted to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. Jesus said to him, 'Follow me.' Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, 'We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, Joseph's son, from Nazareth.' Nathanael responded, 'Can anything from Nazareth be good?' Philip said, 'Come and see.' Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said about him, 'Here is a genuine Israelite, in whom there is no deceit.' Nathanael asked him, 'How do you know me?' Jesus replied, 'Before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree.' Nathanael replied, 'Rabbi, you are God's son. You are the King of Israel.' Jesus answered, 'Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these. I assure you that you will see heaven open and God's angels going up to heaven and down to earth on the human one.'" So reading it that time, I caught even more questions than I've ever caught. There are probably like 8-10 questions asked in that set of verses, both from Jesus and to Jesus. But the main one I want to look at there is towards the beginning. So at the beginning of the story, of course, you get the couple of disciples of John, and you get John just point up the road and say, "Look, there's the Messiah, there's the guy that you've been waiting for." And immediately these two disciples just take off, which I find really funny because you have to imagine John just standing there and he's like, well, there go two of my guys. So then you get the two disciples on the road following Jesus. And clearly they haven't interacted yet. So these are just two guys that happen to be following this other guy, Jesus. And Jesus basically turns around and says, like, what are you doing? Like, he had to be pretty confused at that point. But he turns around and he says, what are you looking for? And I find this a really interesting question. Mainly because the disciples don't answer him. The disciples just say, where are you staying? Like, they're just avoiding the question. Because, of course, they've been looking for the Messiah. They've been looking for this person to rescue them, to do whatever they think he might do. They're looking for a who. They're not looking for a what. And so when Jesus asks, what are you looking for? I think in the centuries that the Jewish people have been looking for the Messiah, they've really forgotten why they're looking for him, or what they're actually looking for in this person. So Jesus asked them that very pointed sort of question of self-discovery, of self-awareness, to see if they really know what they're looking for. And they apparently don't. They don't have an answer. And there are a number of things, of course, that you could be looking for at that point. At one point, they thought the Messiah was going to be their king, their conqueror sort of king, to actually free them politically from the Roman rule, that sort of thing. That was the dominant thought at the time, because at this time, the Jewish people have been under the rule of the Roman Empire for so long that they're just looking for some freedom from that. So that, at that point, was what they thought probably the Messiah would look like. But obviously, we learn about Jesus later, and he's nothing like that. So that question of what are you looking for has really been muddled in the Jewish history of what is the Messiah supposed to do? And what are you looking for if you're searching for this Messiah? And this is a question that we can continue to ask, I think. Because as we have people come through the doors of the church, as we have people find their places in the pews, I feel like we've all been looking for something, but we don't always know why we've ended up here. Even those of us who have been here a while tend to forget what our question was to begin with. And there are some yearnings in all of our hearts, I think, that we're looking for something, but we're not always sure what that is. See, it's my belief, in general at least, that there are always questions in our hearts, questions that we carry with us, things that we're not certain about, things that really make us uncomfortable when we start to think about them. Those are the types of questions that I think Jesus would search out. And those are the kinds of questions that I really want to get into here, because those are the basis of where our faith really comes from. Because in my opinion, if you accept a faith that you've just been told, if you accept something, some sort of dogma that you've just been taught for years, once that faith comes under pressure, once it's tested, that's the kind of faith that often fails. Not always, but often fails. However, if you have really searched it out for yourself, if you've searched out those deep and meaningful questions and found an answer for you, then that's the kind of faith that really stands strong. It really sticks with you. So this is the kind of question, I think, that we really need to answer. What are you looking for? Inside of the church, there are a number of things that you can be looking for. And I think knowing some of those answers, even if they aren't our answers, can also be really important. Because as the church, we're not only searching, but we're also trying to help people find their answers. It's kind of this duplicitous nature of being a Christian, where we're never quite perfect. We're seeking that Christ-like perfection, and we're also trying to lead people to that. So amongst our own searching, I think we need to remember that we need to be supporting other people in their questioning, to support people in trying to find those answers. So some of those answers, obviously, are kind of obvious. A lot of people find the church for some really common reasons. Like a lot of people are just looking for that comfort. They've had hard times in their lives, and they just want somebody to really stick with them. Or, of course, they can be searching some of those really existential questions out. And they're hoping that this religion can help them find those answers. I certainly hope that we can lead them a little bit in that direction. So there are a few reasons, of course, that people end up here. And I think that we need to remember that it's okay to ask those questions. That these are the kinds of questions that Jesus really values. Because Jesus always wanted people to search out those answers. I hesitate saying searching out the answers because I also think that it's the question that really drives us. Because, of course, humanity's been asking these questions for centuries, for longer than that even. And nobody really has put out this handbook of like, this is the purpose of life, this is the meaning of life. So I think it's partly just that asking of question that is really meaningful. Because that's also where we find the need for God. So today, I would just simply ask you, what are you looking for? Have you considered it lately? Have you considered why you're sitting in these pews? Or have you just kind of been going through the motions? Have you just always done this? What are you looking for? What are those yearnings of your heart that you need to remember to keep searching out? So also, to put in my own plug once again, I would love to hear some of your questions. I would love to know what those yearnings are, what really drives your life, what really sits in your heart, and also what troubles your heart. Because once again, as the church, we need to remember to support one another through those questions, because this is the place, in my opinion, to search those things out. This is the place to really ask those deep and testing questions. Not questions of doubt, but questions of exploration. Questions of wonder. I would also suggest that perhaps this is one of those times when we need a Christ-like faith. We need to have that, or Christ-like, not Christ-like, childlike faith, excuse me. We need to have that same sort of wonder and that ability to just constantly ask questions and explore and experience. So yet again, I would simply leave you with this. What are you looking for? And may you search that out through the comfort and the support of the church. Amen.